The rain came down in relentless sheets, turning the cracked sidewalks of Lexington Avenue into a slick, glistening maze of puddles. Streetlights flickered feebly, their glow barely cutting through the mist and darkness. It was late, past 11 p.m., and most shops had already shuttered against the storm. But inside a tired little diner, its neon sign sputtering against the rain, one woman was still working. Serena Carter had been on her feet for over 12 hours, wiping down counters, refilling coffee cups, offering tired smiles to customers who barely noticed. She was exhausted, her chestnut-brown skin damp with sweat and the heavy air of the storm. Still, as she wiped the counter one last time, her eyes caught a movement outside. A small figure hunched over in a battered wheelchair, soaked to the bone, shivering under a frayed blanket that offered no real protection. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His tiny hands clutched the blanket tightly. He looked fragile, abandoned, a child far too young to be left to face the brutal night alone. Serena's heart clenched. Without hesitation, she threw down her rag, pushed open the diner door, and stepped into the biting wind. "Hey, sweetie," she called softly, crouching beside him, trying to sound calm, not scare him. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The boy flinched at first, wide blue eyes lifting to meet hers, uncertain, almost apologetic. "I'm waiting for my dad," he mumbled, his voice almost lost to the rain. Serena glanced up and down. The street, empty, deserted, except for the occasional hiss of tires on wet asphalt. No one was coming. No father rushing through the rain, no shelter in sight. Her instincts screamed at her. This wasn't safe, not for him, not tonight. She smiled warmly and said, "Well, you can't stay out here, baby. Come inside with me. It's warm. I'll get you something special." He hesitated, trembling, then gave a small, reluctant nod. Carefully, Serena gripped the handles of his wheelchair and pushed him inside. The warmth of the diner wrapped around them immediately, the familiar smell of buttered toast and burnt coffee filling the air, a comforting shield against the storm. She led him to a booth near the radiator, wrapping a dry towel over his small shoulders. Kneeling down to his eye level, she smiled. "I'm Serena," she said, her voice kind, steady. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The boy wiped his nose and whispered, "Daniel." "Daniel," she repeated with a nod. "That's a strong name. Are you hungry?" He nodded shyly. Serena didn't waste another second. She moved into the kitchen like she had a mission, slicing fresh sourdough bread, grilling it until golden brown, ladling out a hot bowl of tomato soup, the very meal her grandmother had once made for her when the world outside felt too cold to bear. Minutes later, she placed the food in front of Daniel, tucking a napkin into his lap with the tenderness of someone who understood too well what it felt like to be forgotten. "This one's on me," she said. Daniel's eyes widened. The simple kindness overwhelming. He took a bite, gooey cheese stretching long between the bread, and murmured almost reverently, "This is the best thing I've ever had." Serena laughed softly, watching him eat with a ferocity that made her heart ache. "Good food makes everything better," she told him lightly. But inside, a deeper sadness stirred. No child should have to be this grateful for something so basic. And she thought that was the end of it. A small moment of humanity in a hard world. She didn't know that across the street, hidden in the shadowed interior of a black Bentley, a man was watching. A man whose presence could change everything. A man who owed her a debt he had no idea how to repay. And Serena's life, so carefully, built on small kindnesses, was about to be turned upside down. Across the street, tucked behind the tinted windows of a sleek black Bentley, Raymond Holt watched. The neon sign of the diner flickered against the rain, painting streaks of red and blue across the car's polished surface. But Raymond didn't notice the rain. He wasn't thinking about the slick streets or the late hour. His sharp gray eyes were locked on the scene unfolding inside the diner, and on the woman who had pulled his son from the cold without hesitation, without expectation. At 46, Raymond was not a man easily moved. He had built Holt Dynamics from the ground up into a billion-dollar empire by eliminating inefficiency, emotion, weakness. His world was made of steel and numbers, of hard calls and harder consequences. Charity was a word he scoffed at. Kindness was a liability. Yet tonight, as he watched Serena Carter wipe tomato soup from his son's chin, Raymond felt something he couldn't easily name, something that unsettled him. He had been delayed. A call with investors in Japan had run longer than expected. He had told Daniel to wait by the diner for just a few minutes. Just a few. But the rain had come, and the minutes had stretched too long. And now here he was, powerless, watching another person do what he should have done himself, care for his son. Raymond's jaw tightened. He reached for his phone, dialing without hesitation. "Nora," he said when his assistant picked up. His voice clipped and low. "Get down to Lexington Diner. No suits, no heels, blend in 20 minutes. Find out everything you can about the woman with Daniel." There was a pause on the other end. "Sir." "By morning," he cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. Then he hung up, eyes never leaving the window. Inside the diner, Daniel was laughing. Real, honest laughter that filled the small space and made it warmer than the radiator ever could. Serena was wiping his messy chin with a napkin, shaking her head and teasing him about being a messy eater. Daniel swung his legs under the table, no longer trembling, no longer small and scared. Raymond felt the weight of that moment settle in his chest, heavier than he liked. He wasn't used to being in anyone's debt, much less a stranger's, much less a waitress in a run-down diner. But debts needed to be paid. It was a matter of principle. What Serena Carter didn't know was that her life had already shifted course, that a man who didn't believe in kindness, only leverage, had just decided she mattered. Not because of her smile, not because of her service, but because she had seen his son not as a burden, not as a billionaire's heir, but simply as a boy who needed help. Serena wiped her hands on her apron, casting a quick glance out the window, uneasy without knowing why. Rain streaked down the glass, blurring the edges of the world outside. She didn't see the Bentley tucked in the shadows. She didn't see the man inside calculating her future. She only saw Daniel, finishing the last bite of his grilled cheese, with a satisfied grin, and that was enough. For now, because in less than an hour someone new would walk through that diner door. Someone sent by Raymond Holt. Someone who would test Serena's instincts, her heart, and everything she thought. She knew about people like him. The game had already begun. And Serena didn't even know she was playing. Serena trudged home that night with soaked sneakers and a head full of worry. The rain hadn't let up, drenching the crumbling sidewalks and pooling in dark puddles that reflected the dim city lights. Her small apartment on West Fayette Street wasn't much. A one-bedroom walk-up where the heater barely worked, and the walls were so thin she could hear the neighbor's TV blaring 2 doors down. Still, it was hers. She let herself in, locking the door with a tired sigh, feeling the ache settle deep in her bones. The night's events gnawed at her. Daniel's hesitant smile, the way that strange woman had rushed him away with a fake ease that didn't fool Serena for a second. She had seen it before. The tight smiles, the quick glances, the silence that screamed louder than words. That woman wasn't Daniel's aunt. Serena knew it in her gut. But what could she have done? A black woman raising a scene in a diner. After midnight would only end one way, and it wouldn't be in her favor. She rubbed her face, trying to push the unease away when a sharp knock rattled the door. Serena froze. No one came to her place unannounced. Not at this hour, not in this weather. Peeking through the peephole, she stiffened. A man stood there, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an expensive black coat that gleamed even under the weak hallway lights. His presence didn't match the building, didn't belong to this part of the city. He didn't knock like someone asking permission. He knocked like someone who already owned the place. Serena kept the chain on as she cracked the door an inch. "Who is it?" she asked, voice steady but firm. There was a slight pause, then a voice, low, composed, too composed. "Raymond Holt." The name meant nothing to her. "What do you want?" She pressed. "To talk," he said simply. Serena's instincts screamed to slam the door shut, bolt every lock and forget this night ever happened. But curiosity, stubborn, reckless curiosity, won. She undid the chain and opened the door, just enough to see him clearly. His face was sharp, every line honed by a life of decisions that never needed second-guessing. His shoes were spotless, his coat worth more than her monthly rent. Power radiated from him, cold, surgical. "I don't know you," Serena said flatly. "No," Raymond agreed, his gray eyes unreadable. "But you know my son." The world tilted slightly. Serena gripped the doorframe. "Daniel," she said slowly, a barely perceptible nod. "I was across the street last night." Serena's blood turned cold. "You were watching?" "I was," he said without apology. She exhaled sharply, anger bubbling up. "You here to complain that I fed your kid?" "No." His gaze flickered. Something too fast to catch. "I'm here because I don't believe in charity. I believe in paying debts." Before she could process that, he stepped forward, reaching into his coat. Serena tensed, heart thudding against her ribs. But all he pulled out was an envelope. Thick, heavy, the kind of paper you only saw in boardrooms and courtrooms. He placed it carefully on her battered kitchen table. Serena didn't move. "What is that?" she asked, her voice wary. "A job offer," Raymond said simply. Her mind blanked for a moment, words evaporating. "A what?" He tilted his head slightly, studying her like an equation he had already solved. "A position at Holt Dynamics, 6 figures, full benefits." Serena barked out a disbelieving laugh. "You think waving a paycheck around makes us even?" Raymond didn't flinch. "I'm not offering charity, Serena. I'm offering opportunity." The way he said her name made something shift inside her, a pull she didn't want to acknowledge. "You don't even know me," she shot back. "I know enough," he replied smoothly. "You gave my son warmth when no one else would. You didn't treat him like an inconvenience. You didn't ask for anything. That's rare." Serena's throat tightened. She hated how his words found their mark, hated how much she needed what he was offering. 6 figures. Stability. A life beyond counting pennies and praying for rent extensions. She could fix everything that had been broken for so long. Still, she forced herself to ask, what would I even be doing? Raymond's mouth almost curved into a smile. "Negotiations, public relations, you're good with people. I need someone who's real." Serena shook her head, still trying to catch up. "You've got an army of Ivy League robots. Why me?" His answer was quiet, almost reluctant. "Because I trust you more than I trust them." The words landed hard. Trust wasn't something men like him gave easily. Or at all. Serena looked down at the envelope again, feeling its weight pressing against everything she was trying so hard to hold together. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Don't ever owe these people anything. But this wasn't charity. This was a chance. Finally, she looked up at him, steady and sure. "I'll think about it," she said. Raymond gave a single nod. "Good." And just like that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the rain. Serena stood there for a long time after the door closed, the envelope trembling slightly in her hands, knowing deep down she already had her answer. The first day at Holt Dynamics felt like stepping into another universe. Serena stood at the base of the skyscraper, head tilted back, watching the mirrored glass stretch endlessly toward a gray sky. She tightened her thrift store blazer around her shoulders, feeling the judgment before she even crossed the marble threshold. Inside, the lobby gleamed like a palace, polished floors, crisp uniforms, walls that seemed to hum with silent, invisible power. The moment she stepped through the revolving door, every eye snapped toward her, not with curiosity, with calculation, like they were fitting her into a mental spreadsheet. Race, clothes, accent, worth. Their expressions didn't say welcome. They said, prove it. Serena didn't flinch. She had been underestimated before. It had never stopped her, and it wouldn't now. She squared her shoulders and made her way toward the elevators, her second-hand heels clicking sharp against the floor, each step a quiet act of rebellion. Raymond was waiting for her upstairs, perched behind a desk so minimalist it looked like it belonged in a museum, not a tech giant's nerve center. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline behind him, The whole city sprawled out at his feet. He didn't look up as she entered, just gestured to the chair across from him without a word. "You're late," he said, finally lifting his gaze. Those gray eyes sharp as scalpels. Serena lifted an eyebrow, sliding into the seat without apology. "By 2 minutes," she replied, voice calm. "You'll survive." For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not anger, not exactly. Interest. A tiny crack in the perfect polished armor. Before she could savor the moment, the door opened again and in walked Nora, the woman from the diner. She looked different now, sleek and professional, carrying a tablet instead of a forced smile. Her gaze flickered over Serena with clinical detachment, like a scientist inspecting an experiment. "Miss Carter," Nora said smoothly, her voice polished, to a gleam. "Welcome to Holt Dynamics." Serena met her gaze head-on, letting a slow smile curve her lips. "Good to see you again, Ms. Winters." A tiny flicker crossed Nora's face. Surprise, maybe even grudging respect. But she masked it, quickly turning to Raymond. "The Orion Group files are ready," she said, offering him the tablet. "Would you like me to brief her on company protocols?" Raymond shook his head without looking up. "No, I will." Nora hesitated just a fraction of a second before nodding and slipping out of the office. As she passed Serena, she murmured just loud enough for her to hear. "Good luck." It didn't sound like encouragement. It sounded like a warning. Raymond stood, walking around the desk and handing Serena a slim folder. "The Orion Group wants to move production overseas, save costs, increase profits. Thousands of domestic jobs gone overnight." Serena flipped through the documents, her stomach tightening. Names, numbers, families reduced to budget lines and red ink. "And you want me to do what exactly?" she asked, voice cool. "I want you to stop them," Raymond said simply, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. Serena looked up, searching his face. "Why me?" "Because you understand something they don't," he said, leaning in slightly. "You know what it's like to fight when you have nothing left to lose." The words hit harder than she expected, slicing past her defenses. She closed the folder slowly, meeting his gaze. "You talk a lot for a guy who hates small talk." A shadow of a smile tugged at the corner of Raymond's mouth, gone as fast as it came. "Meetings at noon," he said. "Don't be late again." Serena stood, tucking the folder under her arm. Wouldn't dream of it. The conference room was an icebox, all steel and glass designed to intimidate. Serena sat beside Raymond at the long mahogany table, facing 3 men in expensive suits. The kind of men who didn't see people, only profit margins. Philip Langford, the Orion Group's lead negotiator, barely looked at her. He didn't need to. In his mind, she didn't matter. Raymond opened the meeting with brutal efficiency, laying out the facts, the stakes. Langford responded with a practiced smile, the kind rich men wore when they thought they had already won. "It's not personal," Langford said, voice oily. "It's just business." Serena's fingers curled into fists beneath the table. She had heard that phrase too many times. It wasn't personal when they raised her mother's rent. It wasn't personal when they shuttered the textile plant that employed half her neighborhood. Always business, always bloodless until it was your blood. She leaned forward, her voice like a blade. "Funny," she said. "It's never personal until it's your family losing everything." For the first time, Langford actually looked at her. Serena didn't blink. She slid a document across the table, a financial analysis she had pulled together herself. It showed that moving production would save money for exactly 18 months. After that, labor costs overseas would spike, shipping fees would rise, and bad press would hammer their stock price into the dirt. Langford picked up the paper, scanning it, his smugness slipping. "You can take the short-term win," Serena said, her voice steady. "Or you can make the smart move and keep your empire." Tact. The room shifted. Raymond said nothing, letting the silence stretch like a wire pulled tight. Langford set the paper down carefully, his expression unreadable. "We'll revisit the proposal," he said finally. The meeting ended. Serena stood up, feeling Raymond's eyes on her, weighing her again. "You did good," he said quietly as they walked back to his office. "Damn right I did," she shot back with a grin. And for the first time, she felt it. Not just survival, not just scraping by. She was starting to win. 2 months in, Serena had found her rhythm at Holt Dynamics. Or so she thought. She had learned how to survive the glass-walled pressure chambers, how to walk with her chin up through lobbies full of stairs that said she didn't belong. She had won negotiations that were supposed to drown her, prove she was more than just a diversity hire, more than a feel-good headline. For the first time in her life, Serena wasn't just surviving. She was building something. Respect, power, a future, and that's exactly when they came for her. It started with a single printed email, passed quietly into her hands by Nora in the hallway. Serena could still remember the way the paper felt, heavier than it should have, like it already knew the weight it was about to drop onto her life. The email was a leak, classified financial data, forwarded to the press, and the sender's name at the top wasn't a stranger's. It was hers. The blood drained from her face. The words blurred in front of her eyes. Serena barely heard Nora's voice, low, urgent. "You didn't do this. I know you didn't. But someone wants it to look like you did." Serena's heart slammed against her ribs. In this world, in this building, innocence didn't matter. Appearances did. She knew the rules. A black woman accused was a black woman guilty. No second chances, no benefit of the doubt. Raymond's office felt like walking into an execution chamber. He sat behind his desk, his hands folded, his face carved from stone. Serena slapped the email down in front of him, her voice tight. "This isn't me." "I know," he said quietly, but it didn't matter what he knew. "The board doesn't," he added, voice flat. Serena wanted to scream, to flip the desk, to rage at the injustice burning holes through her chest. But she didn't. Rage was a luxury she couldn't afford. She planted her hands on the desk, leaning in. "So what now?" Raymond's jaw tightened. "Now we find who set you up, we, not you. Not I, we." It was the first time he had stood beside her without reservation. It should have made her feel safer. It didn't. The clock was ticking, and everyone in this building was a shark that smelled blood in the water. The next 24 hours blurred into a frenzy. Serena and Nora, unlikely allies, tore through server logs, email trails, security footage. Somewhere in the digital maze, the truth was hiding, and they were running out of time to find it before the board forced Raymond's hand. Before, Holt Dynamics decided she was expendable. At 3:17 a.m., they found it. An external server, a hidden account, and a name, Eric Calloway, senior executive, 10 years at Holt Dynamics, a man with a golden reputation and a poisonous soul. He had set Serena up, used her as a shield to hide his own dirty work. By morning, Serena wasn't just ready to defend herself. She was ready to go on the attack. She stormed into the boardroom without waiting to be summoned, without permission. Every head in the room turned, every mouth thinned into disapproval. She didn't care. One of the board members, a thin-lipped man in a $1,000 suit, gestured coldly. "Ms. Carter, I assume you know why you're here." Serena didn't sit. She didn't blink. She dropped a thick folder onto the table. With a heavy thud, "I'm here to show you why you're wrong," she said. The room fell silent as the documents slid across polished mahogany. Call logs, bank transfers, emails traced straight to Eric Calloway. Serena's voice didn't shake. "You wanted a scapegoat. You picked the wrong one." Eric Calloway tried to protest, but the evidence roared louder than his words. By the time Raymond stood and spoke, cold, final. "Effective immediately, Eric Calloway is terminated. Full. Legal action will be pursued." The board wasn't looking at Serena like an intruder anymore. They were looking at her like a threat. She didn't smile. Not yet. There were bigger battles ahead. But for the first time since walking into Holt Dynamics, Serena Carter wasn't just fighting to survive. She was winning. And this time, they would never see her coming. Weeks later, Serena stood at Daniel's high school graduation. a sea of folding chairs stretching out beneath the spring sun. The boy she had once found shivering outside a diner now wheeled proudly across the stage, his diploma clutched tightly in his hands, his grin stretching from ear to ear. Serena clapped until her hands stung, feeling something unfamiliar crack open inside her. Not pride for herself, but for him. Raymond Holt stood beside her, hands tucked neatly into the pockets of a sharply tailored suit. For once there was no icy reserve in his posture, no calculated distance. Just a father watching his son, letting the moment fill him in a way money never could. "You did good, Carter," Raymond said quietly, his voice almost lost in the sea of cheers. Serena smirked, sideways at him. "Damn right I did." Daniel rolled his wheelchair up to them, diploma raised high like a championship trophy. "I told you I'd make it," he beamed, his cheeks flushed with joy. Serena leaned down, ruffling his hair with a laugh. "Never doubted you." "For a second, champ." Raymond raised an eyebrow as Daniel looked up expectantly. "You guys gonna hug or something?" Daniel teased. Serena recoiled playfully. "God, no." Raymond sighed with exaggerated patience. "Absolutely not." Daniel just laughed, harder, wheeling off toward his friends, free and fearless. Serena watched him go, her heart full in a way she hadn't thought possible a year ago, when the world was still just survival, one shift at a time, one rent check at a time. She hadn't just changed her life. She had built something bigger than herself. Years later, that legacy took permanent root. The brass plaque outside Holt Dynamics headquarters read, "Serena Carter, Vice President of Corporate Strategy." The office that once seemed carved from ice now carried her fingerprints everywhere. Not literally, but in the way the company moved, the way it spoke, the way it cared. Under her leadership, Holt Dynamics launched a new era: real investment in ethical labor, partnerships with minority-owned businesses, scholarships for underserved communities. Serena's fingerprints weren't just on the building. They were in the blood of the future Holt was creating. Across town, a sleek glass and brick community center opened with a ribbon-cutting ceremony. The sign above the entrance glinted in the afternoon sun. Carter Holt Foundation, building dreams, from the ground up. At the podium, Daniel stood tall, now a college freshman, wearing a dark blue suit and a bright, uncontainable smile. "I wouldn't be here," he said, voice trembling just slightly, "if someone hadn't believed in me when I was just a kid freezing in the rain." The crowd applauded, but Serena barely heard it. Her throat tightened too much to speak. She caught Raymond's eye across the gathering, and for once he wasn't the billionaire, the CEO, the strategist. He was just a father who had learned that sometimes the people who change your world the most are the ones you never see coming. As the sun dipped behind the skyline and flashbulbs popped in the growing twilight, Serena stood silently, feeling the weight of the past lift off her shoulders. From a drenched sidewalk to a cheap diner to the highest towers in the city, the road had been brutal, bloody, unforgiving, but she had walked it, and now others would have an easier path because she did, and this was only the beginning.